Oh, oh, what happened? Okay. Ooh, I can't believe it.
Oh.
Excuse me. Yes, you. I am River? Carver. Carver. The Zora.
Oh.
It appears that you are a traveler, but may I ask you what brought you here? I could ask you the same. How very astute of you. An excellent query indeed. I, by order of Prince Sidine of Zora's domain, am searching for a Hylian, or I was, but then I fell asleep. I awoke to a loud noise and awful quaking, and now here I am. I'd like to go down and be on my way, but I'm simply too high up. I need to figure something out. Princeton is down at the bridge below, but for some reason I cannot seem to catch his attention. But you are a Hylian, yes?
Ah.
Duh. Well, then, my luck has improved.
Oi.
Prince Sidine! I found one! I found a Hylian!
Ah.
Prince Sidine doesn't seem to notice my struggle. Perhaps I should swallow my fear and jump to the river below. Then I could return to him. He must be worried sick.
Ooh.
Nope. No, nope. Can't do it. I'm too high up.
Oh.
I'll likely meet the gods after before I seen again.
Oh.
Mr. Hiley. This doesn't even ask. I just now realized this dude doesn't even ask my name. He just says, Mr. Hylian, I must apologize. It would be some time before I could get back to Prince Sidine. Please, you must leave me here and go on ahead. Okay, bye. Now, I will talk to him in a minute after I get this shrine. And of course, there's a freaking Zora right beside the shrine. I hope she don't see me before I get there. Don't talk to me. Zora, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. Don't shout at me. Don't shout at me. Don't shout at me.
Oh.
You oi! I'm busy. I'm wondering, do you think I have enough time to do the Sidine run? Oh, melee. My first melee shrine. Other than the other one. That one was training. This one's an actual strength. Well, at least it's a minor one. I can't. Oh, well, apparently my real life strength don't want to work with me because I can't get the stupid wrapper open. Okay. Mm, I only got three of that. Maybe we can go with this instead. Broadsword. Wait, are the broadsword? Nope, the broadsword's a lot stronger. Ready, set, go. Let's do this. Oh, wrong. Thank you. Okay, dude, that's when I got three of those. Yeah. Go onward. How long it takes to go through, get to Zora's. See if I can make it. Uh-oh. I almost thought stream ended up. What's upon you, the spirit orb.
Ah,
Not yet. Okay. What do you want?
oh,
Oh my word. How wonderful you are.
oh.
Perfect. It must be my. Oh, I apologize for calling out to you so suddenly. I am prefer to. I am butchering every person, thing, creature's name on this game of the Zora. I have been searching for a Hylian like you for a very long time. My name, my home, Zora's domain, is in terrible danger. That is why Prince Sidine sent me to search for a strong Hylian warrior.
Ah,
Prince Sidine is waiting at Mu- e- in- in- Bridge. Would you please talk to the prince and perhaps save us all? We would be very, be ever so grateful. I just thought of it. I kind of was wanting to get the Master Sword before doing this. Eh. Okay. Time for the talk.
Say, hey there, young one. Up top, above you. Pardon the entrance, but you're a Hylian, aren't you? I was hoping perhaps you'd have a moment to talk. Ah.
I can never do the sitting voice, so yeah. I'm just gonna let you guys let whoever let you read. How do you base somebody's name off of their strength? I don't think I could sound princely if I read that. That dude, like, seriously, the voice person for Prince Sitting is like very like the way he sounded. Just that little cutscene, that little itty bitty cut. Like he sounded somewhat Jamaican at first, and then he went. So I'm like, yeah, I don't think I can do that. I know there was some shock mushroom stars. I thought I saw before, but might have been further down the thing. Now the treacherous thing. I don't think I have. I think this is where. Oh, I think this is where I get more arrows. I think I got some arrows. I'm not really. Way back down. He found me. Oh, you're too low. You know what? Eric. Eric. Oh, you landed. At least I don't have to go swimming for it. Ah! There they are. Zap shrooms. That's what it is. Zap shrooms, not. Arrows. Arrows. Arrows! I love putting down the area because the arrows. Apple. Arrows. Crazy. This stuff. Damn it. Pretty good. Thing. I put that down. Going down. Get back over. There we go. Got it. Got it. I'm up. Dang it. rock. Finally. Lost a couple of things, but whatever. It's me. Thing. Yes.
Oh!
Fucking wing. You know what? F it. Anyway, I'm not gonna sound princely, but whatever. Ever since the occurrence, there have been a lot of around here. Be careful as you proceed. And all of my bras are waiting your arrival. So, no other than that. What's that one? Oh, well. Okay. Calling. Pick up a damn rock and try to hit me with it. You know what? Usually I get more arrows, do my usual here, and because I didn't realize the time to get this done before at least 30 now. Whoa! That's what happens when you like. That was mostly my bad. If I remember correctly, I think through here. And I avoid any of the. Is there a. A little bit later. You know what? I haven't done a core op. Let's do a core op. One's an easy one. Yeah! You found me! Bye-bye! Okay. I mean, I could just go up top. You know what? I'm doing that. I'm completely bypassing all this. Please don't see me. Shooting star! I can't get to you. Cutscene. I need this cutscene. Was there a cutscene right here? I thought I saw a cutscene. Okay. This avoidable. Wait. You missed. Where'd all the other dudes go? Food. Food. I'm taking food. Okay. I wonder what that thing was. Oh, dang it. I picked those up. There's the other cutscene.
Huh?
Hey, Link! You're almost halfway to Zoro's domain. Oh, by the way, there are a few spots ahead with lots of enemies, but I'm sure you will be fine. I believe in you, Link. I swear, I need somebody like Sadine to just like cheer me on all the time. No, wait, I have a couple friends like that. I wish they were here instead. Of course you had to freaking move. Not important. At least not right now. Okay, let's get on with it. If only I could run up that. Or walk up that. Whatever. Let's do the Zora's spear. You know what? Let's just grab all the spears. I have to climb those, but I can't climb those. Okay. I was hoping this one was avoidable. Apparently not. Where's the shock stuff? I'll just make another one. I know how to make one. Is he blue? Okay, I'm not. Give me your shit. I don't want to break it. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of these guys first, because apparently... easier. Oh my god! That was close. Get out of my way. You have awful aim, sir. Oh, it doesn't... Oh. Seriously. Yeah, that one was unavoidable. Where's the food? How far do I have? Is there a way to just get through this right here? I wonder if I could jump from right here to here. I know I can't climb that. Ugh. There's the guy. Let's use that thing instead. See that? Oh, almost there. I'm almost there. one more, a few more cutscenes, really. Where is it? Is it here? Or is it near the bridge? I think it's near the bridge. Yeah, it's near the bridge.
Oh!
Nope, right there. Look below you! Look below! Down here! Okay, we fought down. You were still pretty far off, my friend, but I was sure you'd be passing over this bridge, so I have been waiting for you. For how long? You will be in Zora's domain before you know it. I wish I was there now. In fact, I am giving you a head, going to head that way too. I shall meet you there. So I think this is the last time I'm gonna talk to him. Whoa, Link! Beware, warrior! A monster approaches from behind you. Be gone. What can I have to drop? That for this. just like taking their weapons. Onward. Almost there. Mushrooms. Mushroom. I need a mushroom. Got 2 more minutes on the shop. Oops. No, I'm not gonna be able to surprise this dude. Got you. Oh! He got me before I could. Dang it. There. I was about to break me. Okay. I missed. I said you could have just picked them up. Oh, dang. Tears of the kingdom. Okay. I'm almost there. I am almost there. I seriously just jumped down. Yep, there we go. I knew I could bypass it somehow. I want to get rid of the cutscene. Get to the cutscene. Good on me. I know it's there's there you go, 13. I've got much time before I think another 15 minutes. Zora's domain. Whoa! I've been waiting for you, Link. Welcome. Behold the pride of my people, Zora's domain. Now I shall introduce you to the king. Hurry, this way. And I like how he's saying hurry and he kind of just leisurely walks. It's okay. I gotta get the temple for, or the shrine for right here anyway. Actually, after I get the shrine, I'm gonna end the stream. And it's 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I'm gonna start back up. You know, this is actually the first time in a while that I've done back-to-back streams. Like, what, that's 4 streams altogether now? Technically 5, since there's 2 parts to today's. Is it gonna be warm while cloudy? That's the real question. Oh, this one. This. I hope I can get this fast. I almost got squished. I almost got squished. Oh! That's the first time I've done that. Usually I can see if there's... That's why. Another one. Nope. Okay, there. Oh my god. Stupid boulders. Dodge! Dodge! Oh. Almost dropped. Okay. So, dang it. Okay. I'll do this. The first time, do it like this. Oh, don't fall off. Center. Nope, not there. Oh, I can use that one there. Oh, that took longer than I needed to. Okay, while this dude's talking, thank you for joining me. I will try Monday night, 5, 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The only reason is because I have work in the morning, and yeah, have a good evening. If you're a mom or anything, it's still Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. And good night. Guys, next time. As I get out of here. Have a good night.